The organ music swelled to a crescendo and then, with a final shuddering chord, fell silent. The silence that followed was not the hallowed, expectant hush of a wedding. It was the kind of silence that doesn't echo, the kind that settles, thick and suffocating, like dust on an abandoned ruin. Alara stood at the altar, a statue carved from grace and resilience, the silk of her architecturally precise gown pooling around her feet. Opposite her, Marcus Thorne, a man built from swagger and borrowed brilliance, adjusted the microphone on its stand. He was supposed to be reading his vows. He did not look at her. He looked at the assembled guests, a curated audience for the performance of his life. His posture was relaxed, a study in casual power. He tapped the microphone, a sharp, percussive sound that made several people flinch. "I've been thinking a lot about contracts," he began, his voice smooth, conversational. It was the voice he used to close deals, to charm investors, to soothe panicked board members. It was a voice that had never once been used for honesty. "In my business, we live and die by them. The terms, the clauses, the exit strategies. Marriage," he said, finally letting his gaze drift to Alara, a lazy, proprietary sweep, "is the ultimate contract." Alara did not move. Her expression was a mask of serene neutrality, a skill she had perfected over 2 years of being the silent, uncredited architect of his success. She had designed the Helios Tower, the skyscraper that had made his name, sketching its elegant, sun-drenched lines while he was out taking the credit. He had called her his muse. She knew she was his engine. "And in any contract," Marcus continued, his smile widening into something sharp and cruel, "you have to assess the value of your assets. You have to ensure that what you are acquiring is worth the price you are paying, that it will perform to expectations, that it won't be a liability." A tremor, a collective intake of breath rippled through the cathedral. This was not part of the script. This was a hostile takeover. He was not making a vow, he was announcing a divestment. Alara's focus narrowed to a single point. The small, almost invisible scar above his left eyebrow, a relic from a childhood fall. She had once traced it with her finger, a moment of perceived intimacy that she now understood was just another form of due diligence on his part. He had been assessing her, weighing her, calculating her worth from the very beginning. He had not updated the file. He was working from a version of her that had never been accurate. He saw her silence as compliance, her grace as weakness. He was about to make a very serious miscalculation. "And so," Marcus said, his voice dropping as if sharing a painful confidence, "with the deepest regret, I have to announce that this acquisition is terminated. The terms are unfavorable." He looked directly at Alara, his eyes cold, triumphant. He expected tears. He expected a scene. He expected her to shatter like cheap glass. She did not scream. She did not cry. She did not collapse. Alara simply held his gaze, and for the first time she let him see the steel beneath the silk. It was not the hot fire of rage, but the cold, dense weight of a star that has collapsed in on itself. A quiet, terrifying gravity. She gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was not a gesture of defeat. It was an acceptance of terms. His terms. Then she turned. With the same unhurried grace she had used walking down the aisle, she now walked back up it. The heavy doors of the cathedral opened before her, spilling a rectangle of indifferent sunlight onto the marble floor. She stepped into it and was gone. The silence Marcus had so carefully crafted was shattered by 1,000 frantic whispers, but he barely heard them. He was staring at the empty space where she had stood, a sudden, chilling premonition dawning on him that he had not just canceled a contract. He had triggered a clause he hadn't known existed. What happens next will change everything. She was carrying a secret, an heir he knew nothing about, and the man who was its true father did not operate on contracts. He operated on consequences. 9 months later, the world was no longer silk and sunlight. It was the relentless, percussive drumming of rain against the thin glass of a fourth-floor walk-up. The air in the small apartment was thick with the scent of damp plaster and the faint, sweet smell of baby powder. Alara stood over a small bassinet, her hand resting gently on the chest of the sleeping infant within. Min-jun, her son. His breath was a little too quick, a little too shallow. The quiet exhaustion of long-term suffering had settled deep into her bones, a permanent resident in the house of her body. The money from the sale of her engagement ring had lasted for a while. The freelance architectural work she could find, small, soul-crushing renovations for people who haggled over every dollar, had sustained her. But now both were gone. The last of her savings had been spent on rent and formula. The fever had taken hold of Min-jun 2 days ago, and the last of the infant Tylenol was gone. She looked at her son, a perfect, tiny creature who was the sum of one night of profound grief and unexpected connection. A year before Marcus, the night her father's long illness had finally ended, she had fled to a quiet hotel bar. A man had sat beside her. He did not offer platitudes. He did not press for conversation. He had simply sat with her in the shared space of their solitude. He was Korean, dressed in a suit that cost more than her car, and his stillness was a universe unto itself. They had talked, eventually, about architecture, about loss, about the different kinds of silence. One thing had led to another, a brief, anonymous collision of two lonely orbits. She had left before he woke, a ghost in the morning light. 9 months later, Min-jun was born, with his father's quiet, observant eyes. Now, those eyes were clouded with fever. The sharp terror of immediate threat cut through her exhaustion. She bundled him carefully, wrapping him in layers of blankets against the raw November chill, and placed him in his carrier. Her purse held a debit card with a balance of $7.17 and a credit card that had been declined that morning. Hope was not a strategy, but it was all she had. The pharmacy was aggressively bright, a sterile island in the gray, weeping city. The air hummed with the buzz of fluorescent lights and the quiet beep of machines. Alara stood at the counter, the pharmacist, a tired-looking woman with kind eyes scanning the box of infant fever reducer. Min-jun was a warm, heavy weight against her chest. "That will be $22.50, the woman said. Alara slid her debit card into the machine. She held her breath. The machine chirped, a cheerful, mocking sound. Insufficient funds. She felt a hot flush of shame creep up her neck. She tried the credit card, knowing the outcome but compelled by the desperation of the moment. Declined. "I'm sorry," the pharmacist said, her voice soft with pity. Alara hated the pity more than the refusal. "It's fine," she lied, her own voice brittle. I must have left my other card at home." She turned to leave, her mind racing, trying to calculate what she could possibly sell. Her laptop? She needed it for work. The last of her mother's jewelry? The thought was a physical pain. Her entire world had been reduced to a series of devastating calculations. "Ilara!" The voice was a shock, a discordant note in the symphony of her misery. She turned. Marcus Thorne stood near the entrance, holding a basket with shaving cream and a bottle of expensive shampoo. He was dressed in a cashmere coat, his shoes gleaming despite the rain. He looked healthy, prosperous, annoyed. His eyes flicked from her face to the baby carrier strapped to her chest, a flicker of confusion followed by a wave of irritation. He was not a man who enjoyed complications. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his tone accusing, as if she were trespassing in his world. "I live nearby," she said, her voice flat. She pulled the blanket more securely around Min-jun's face, a primal instinct to shield him from this man's toxic orbit. "Right," he sneered, a small, ugly twist of his lips. "Of course you do. Let me guess. The money ran out?" He took a step closer. "I told you this would happen. I told you you couldn't make it without me." "I'm managing," she said, the lie tasting like ash. He laughed, a short, sharp bark. "Managing? You look like you've been sleeping in a ditch. And what's that?" He gestured with his chin toward the carrier. "Did you start a daycare service?" He had not updated the file. The possibility that the child could be hers, let alone his, was a data point so far outside his operational parameters that his processor couldn't even register it. "It's none of your business," she said, trying to move past him. He blocked her way, his body language shifting from irritation to a familiar, menacing form of control. "Everything about you is my business. We had a life. You had an obligation. You terminated the contract," she reminded him, her voice dangerously quiet. At the altar, in front of 300 people, his face darkened. "A temporary setback, a negotiating tactic. You were supposed to come back. You were supposed to beg." He reached out and grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her coat sleeve. It was the same grip he'd used 100 times before, the one that preceded a quiet threat, a hissed insult, a shove against a wall. "Let go of my arm," she said. The words were clear, precise, and held no trace of fear, only a profound, weary finality. "You are going to come with me," he hissed, his face close to hers. "We are going to fix this. You are going to put whatever that is down, and you are going to get in my car. Take your hand off her." The voice was not loud. It was low, calm, and carried the density of a black hole. It cut through the hum of the lights, the murmur of the other customers, the frantic beating of Alara's own heart. It was a voice that did not need volume to command a room. All sound in the pharmacy seemed to bend towards it and die. Marcus froze, his grip tightening for a second before slackening in confusion. Alara turned her head slowly. Standing near the prescription counter was a man. He was not rushing. He was not performing. He was simply present, a fixed point in a chaotic world. He wore a charcoal suit of impossible quality, the fabric seeming to drink the harsh, fluorescent light. His hands were in his pockets. It was him. The man from the hotel bar. Jae-Hwan Kwan looked at Marcus, his expression unreadable. It was not anger, not yet. It was the calm, detached assessment of a biologist studying a particularly unpleasant insect. He had been standing there, a bottle of something in the hand of the man next to him, his assistant, Mr. Park. He had been observing. "Who the hell are you?" Marcus demanded, trying to reclaim the narrative, his voice a half-beat too loud. Jae-Hwan's gaze shifted from Marcus's face to the hand clamped on Alara's arm. He did not speak again. He simply tilted his head, a minute, almost imperceptible gesture towards his assistant. Mr. Park, a man who seemed to be composed entirely of quiet efficiency and loyalty, placed the bottle he was holding on the counter. He took 2 smooth, unhurried steps forward. He did not look at Marcus's face. He looked at his hand. He reached out and, with a grip that was surprisingly, unnervingly strong, he peeled Marcus's fingers from Alara's arm, one by one, as if removing something distasteful from a piece of fine art. Marcus yelped, a pathetic, high-pitched sound of pain and surprise. He stumbled back, cradling his hand. The power had shifted. The entire atmosphere of the room had changed, the pressure dropping as if before a storm. Marcus had lost control of the scene, and he knew it. His performative confidence collapsed, replaced by the raw panic of a man who has just realized he is in the wrong room, talking to the wrong people. Jae-Hwan took a step forward, his expensive leather shoes making no sound on the linoleum floor. He stopped in front of Alara. His eyes, those same quiet, observant eyes she saw every day in her son's face, met hers. He looked at her, then down at the carrier, where a tiny fist had escaped the blankets. He saw. In one sharp, crystalline moment of recognition, he saw everything. He did not ask. He did not demand. He stated a fact. "I'm coming," he had said on the phone, a lifetime ago it seemed. But he had not come. "Now, here," he simply said. "You're safe." His voice was steady as iron wrapped in silk. He turned his head slightly. "Mr. Park, the car." Mr. Park was already on his phone, murmuring in low, rapid Korean. A sleek black sedan, the kind of car that looks like a block of polished obsidian, pulled up to the curb outside. its engine a silent, powerful hum. Jae-hwan's attention returned to Marcus, who was stammering, trying to piece his shattered authority back together. "Look, I don't know who you are, but this is a private matter between me and my fiancé." A flicker of something, not quite amusement, but a distant cousin of it, passed through Jae-hwan's eyes. "You are mistaken," he said, his voice still low, still calm. "You are a piece of lint on her coat, and I am about to remove you." He looked at Mr. Park, who nodded once. Two more men, dressed in identical dark suits, materialized from the rain and entered the pharmacy. They moved without wasted motion, their presence filling the space. They flanked Marcus, who seemed to shrink before their eyes. "This is ridiculous," Marcus sputtered, his voice cracking. "I'll call the police." "They will not be coming for me," Jae-hwan said, a statement of absolute, unshakable certainty. He looked back at Alara, his gaze softening almost imperceptibly as it rested on her and the child she protected. "It's handled," he said. It was not a promise. It was a report on a completed task. If this story is already gripping you, please hit that like button right now. It tells us you want to see more moments of powerful justice. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is the perfect time. Hit that button so you never miss what comes next in Alara's journey to reclaim her life. The back of the sedan was another world. The clamor of the city, the relentless drumming of the rain, the entire sordid mess of the pharmacy. It all vanished the moment the heavy door closed with a solid, satisfying thud. The silence inside was different from the one in the cathedral. This was an engineered silence, a manufactured peace. The leather seats were cool and smelled faintly of something clean and expensive. Alara sat beside Jae-hwan, the baby carrier on the seat between them like a small, vulnerable island. Minjun had stirred but not woken, cocooned in warmth and quiet. She stared straight ahead at the dark, tinted glass that separated them from the driver. She could feel Jae-hwan's presence beside her, a zone of immense gravitational pull. She was in shock, a disorienting blend of terror and a relief so profound it felt like a physical ache. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The car moved through the rain-slicked streets of the city with a smooth, fluid grace, a predator navigating its territory. "The Helios Tower," Jae-hwan said finally, his voice startling her out of her stupor. He was not looking at her. He was looking out the window at the city scrolling by. "The original schematics were yours." It was not a question. Alara turned to look at him. His profile was sharp, clean lines against the blurred gray light. "How did you know that?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "My company was the primary silent investor in the Thorn Development Group for that project," he explained, his tone conversational, as if they were discussing the weather. "I review all major project files personally. I saw the initial submission, the one with your name on it. It was exceptional. The design had a poetry to it. Then I saw the revised submission 2 months later. The design was identical. The name on the file had changed. He had seen her. Even then, as an anonymous name on a digital file, he had recognized her work, her mind. The validation was a sudden sharp pang in her chest, a wound and a balm all at once. "He said it was better for the project if his name was on it," she said, the excuse sounding flimsy and pathetic even to her own ears, "for the investors." "He lied," Jae-hwan stated simply. "The investors, myself included, were more impressed with the original file. We were concerned by the substitution. It suggested instability in the creative leadership." He turned his head and looked at her, and then his gaze dropped to the carrier. "He does not know." Again, not a question. A confirmation of data. "No," she said, her hand instinctively going to the carrier's handle. "He has no idea." Jae-hwan's eyes met hers. There was no judgment in them, only a quiet, intense focus, as if he were committing every detail of her face to memory. He was cataloging the exhaustion under her eyes, the faint lines of stress around her mouth, the fierce, protective set of her jaw. "The night we met," he began, his voice dropping even lower, "at the St. Regis bar, you were grieving." She nodded, unable to speak. The memory was a blur, shrouded in the fog of her father's death. But she remembered the feeling of being seen, of being allowed her sadness without having to perform it for anyone. His gaze flickered down to Min-jun again, and a complex series of emotions played across his usually impassive face. It was like watching a glacier calve, a slow, monumental shift. There was recognition, there was calculation, and there was something else, something fiercely, terrifyingly proprietary. "He is mine," Jae-hwan said. The words hung in the silent car, heavier than stone. He was not asking for a paternity test. He was not questioning her. He was claiming his son. A corporate/modern metaphor for a deeply personal situation. He was not proposing a merger. He was announcing an acquisition, a friendly one, but non-negotiable. Alara felt a fresh wave of fear, different from the fear Marcus inspired. This was not the fear of a bully. This was the fear of a force of nature, the fear of a man who could reshape the world with a quiet command. She thought about running. She thought about fighting. She thought about the $7 in her bank account and her son's fever. "I don't leave because things become complicated," she said, the words coming out stronger than she felt. It was a line from their long-ago conversation, something he had said about his own business philosophy. He remembered. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I know." The car slowed, turning through a high wrought-iron gate that opened silently at its approach. They drove up a private road, flanked by manicured trees, towards a building that was less an apartment complex and more a vertical fortress of glass and steel overlooking the entire city. "Where are we?" she asked, her voice small. "Home," he replied. He reached across the space between them, his fingers brushing against the baby carrier. It was a gesture of immense gentleness, a stark contrast to the power he so clearly wielded. "You and my son will come with me. You will be safe. You will have everything you need." This was the offer of protection. It was not a request. It was a statement of inevitable outcome. The car stopped. Mr. Park opened her door. The rain had stopped, and the air was clean and cold. Alara looked up at the towering building, then at the man beside her, then at her sleeping son. She had been a ghost for so long, drifting through the wreckage of her life. Now, a king had claimed her. She took a deep breath, unbuckled the carrier, and stepped out of the car and into her new reality. The penthouse was a cathedral of glass, steel, and silence. It occupied the top 3 floors of the building, with panoramic views that turned the sprawling city into a glittering, abstract map. But it was a cold beauty. The furniture was exquisite, minimalist, and looked as though it had never been touched by human hands. The air was sterile, recycled. It was not a home. It was a holding company. A beautiful, empty vessel waiting for a soul. Alara spent the first few days in a state of suspended disbelief. She moved through the vast, empty rooms like a phantom, Min-jun held close to her chest. Her fear of dependency warred constantly with the overwhelming relief of support. A doctor had been summoned, a quiet, efficient woman who had diagnosed Min-jun's fever as a common respiratory virus and provided the proper medication. Within a day, his breathing eased, and the healthy pink returned to his cheeks. The relief was so sharp, so absolute, it brought Alara to her knees in the privacy of her cavernous bedroom suite. Jae-hwan was a ghost of a different sort. He was there, and then he was not. He left before she and the baby woke, and often returned long after they were asleep. He did not crowd her. He did not make demands. His presence was felt not in person, but in the quiet, efficient way her world was being rebuilt around her. A wardrobe of new clothes appeared in her closet, all in her size and taste. Elegant, understated pieces in shades of charcoal, navy, and cream. A pantry and refrigerator were stocked with organic foods, the specific brand of formula she preferred, diapers and wipes. He was not just providing, he was observing, learning her needs and meeting them before she could articulate them. He was managing her life with the same quiet, ruthless efficiency he applied to his business empire. Part of her bristled at being handled, but the larger, more exhausted part of her was profoundly grateful. The turning point came on the fifth day. An elderly woman with a ramrod-straight spine and the same observant eyes as her son appeared at the door of the penthouse, accompanied by Mr. Park. She was dressed in a beautiful traditional handbook of deep plum silk. "This is my mother, Mrs. Kwan," Jae Hwan said, appearing from his office down the hall. It was the first time Ilara had seen him in daylight since their arrival. The old woman's gaze was sharp, assessing. She looked Ilara up and down, then her eyes landed on Minjun, who was awake in Ilara's arms. Mrs. Kwan's severe expression dissolved instantly, melting into a smile of pure, unadulterated joy. "Aigu," she breathed, stepping forward and holding out her hands. "My grandson." Ilara, hesitant, allowed the older woman to take the baby. Mrs. Kwan held Minjun with unpracticed ease, murmuring to him in soft Korean, her face transformed by love. She looked up at Ilara, her smile warm and genuine. "You are too thin," she declared. "My son, he knows how to buy companies, but he does not know how to feed a family. We will fix this." Mrs. Kwan was the soul the penthouse had been missing. She arrived every morning and filled the sterile silence with the scent of simmering bone broth and the sound of her soft chatter. She did not ask Ilara about Marcus or her past. She simply accepted her presence as fact. She saw the architectural journals on the coffee table and nodded in approval. She saw the way Ilara calmed Minjun with a quiet hum and declared her a natural mother. She was a bridge, a buffer, and a source of uncomplicated warmth that Ilara drank in like a woman dying of thirst. She was the wise elder, offering not just sanctuary, but validation. With the immediate crisis of survival averted, Ilara's mind began to clear. The architect within her, so long dormant, began to stir. She found herself studying the penthouse not as a guest, but as a designer. She saw the flaws in its perfection. The living area was vast and impersonal, the furniture arranged for aesthetics, not for living. The southern wall was a sheer curtain of glass, beautiful but brutal in the afternoon sun. One evening, she found Jae Hwan in his office, a spare monastic room furnished with little more than a desk and a screen displaying cascading lines of code and stock tickers. He was staring at the screen, but his focus was elsewhere. "The light in the main room," she began without preamble. "It's inefficient. You're losing thermal energy in the winter and creating a greenhouse effect in the summer. Your HVAC costs must be astronomical." He turned his head slowly, his eyes showing a flicker of surprise and then interest. "They are. You need automated micro-perforated solar shades," she continued, finding her rhythm. "And the furniture is arranged like a museum. It discourages interaction. It needs to be broken into smaller, more intimate zones. A reading area here, a conversation pit there. It would make the space more human." He did not speak. He simply watched her, his head tilted slightly. She was not asking for permission. She was identifying a problem and proposing a solution. She was the most capable person in the room, and for the first time in a very long time, she was acting like it. "Show me," he said, his voice a low command. She pulled a tablet from a side table, her fingers flying across the screen, sketching out her ideas with a series of quick, confident lines. She showed him how to reorient the space, how to use textiles and lighting to create warmth, how to make the beautiful house a functional home. He listened, his focus absolute. He was not just listening to her words. He was watching the way her entire being came alive when she talked about design. He was seeing the woman from the Helios Tower file, the woman whose brilliance had been a line item on someone else's balance sheet. "Do it," he said when she finished. "What?" "Whatever you need. Mr. Park will arrange it, redesign the space. Redesign the whole floor if you want to. It's your home." It was a test and a gift. It was an acknowledgement of her competence. The slow burn of their relationship had begun, not with romance, but with mutual recognition. He provided the safety and resources. She provided the insight and warmth that his controlled, sterile world lacked. While she was redesigning his home, He was systematically dismantling her past. In another part of the city, Marcus Thorne was in a free fall. His primary lender had called in his loan, citing a newly activated clause in his contract he didn't know existed. His top project manager and lead engineer had both resigned on the same day, poached by a rival firm offering triple their salaries. The City Planning Commission had suddenly flagged his next major development project for an environmental review that would delay it by years, effectively killing it. He sat in his office, staring at a stack of red-stamped notices, a storm of confusion and rage brewing inside him. He did not understand. These were not random acts of misfortune. This was a coordinated, systematic attack. It was precise, discreet, and devastatingly effective. It was like watching a building being demolished from the inside out, its structural supports removed one by one until it was nothing but a hollow shell waiting to collapse. He bellowed for his assistant, who scurried in, her face pale. "Who is Jae-hwan Kwon?" Marcus demanded. The assistant paled further. "He's everyone, Mr. Thorne. He's the CEO of Kwon International. They're in shipping, technology, construction, finance. They're everywhere." Marcus slammed his fist on the desk. Why is he doing this to me? But he already knew the answer. It was Alara. It had to be. He had underestimated her. He had seen her as a beautiful, pliable asset, and she had turned out to be a Trojan horse. He didn't comprehend the scale of the man now protecting her. In his vanity, he saw Jae-hwan Kwon not as a global power, but merely as Alara's new lover, a tool she was using for revenge. His arrogance prevented him from seeing the truth. He was not a rival. He was an insect. "Find her," he snarled at his assistant. "I don't care what it costs. Find out where he's keeping her. This ends now." He was wrong. It was just beginning. Marcus Thorne was a man who believed his own press. His world was built on a foundation of performance, on the idea that if you projected enough confidence, reality would eventually bend to your will. He had lost his company, his credit lines were frozen, and his reputation was in tatters, yet he remained convinced that this was all a temporary, theatrical setback. He was blind with an arrogance so profound it functioned as its own distorted form of physics. "Give her 3 days," he had once boasted to a friend after a minor argument with Alara. "She'll be begging to come back. They always do." Now, weeks had passed since the incident in the pharmacy. His life was imploding, yet his core delusion held firm. He believed Alara was being held against her will, a captive princess in a glass tower. He believed this Jae-hwan Kwon was a brutish gangster who had intimidated her, and that she was secretly waiting for Marcus, her rightful partner, to rescue her. He had not updated the file on her. He was still working from the flawed, arrogant assumption that she was his property. His first move was laughably conventional. He had his lawyers file a flurry of frivolous lawsuits, breach of contract, alienation of affection. He even filed a motion claiming custodial rights to a child he had never seen and could not prove existed, a wild, desperate gambit based on a rumor from his terrified ex-assistant. The filings were a performance, designed to intimidate, to create leverage, to drag Alara back into a public battle on his terms. In his silent, minimalist office overlooking the city, Jae-hwan reviewed the legal notices on his tablet. Mr. Park stood by, impassive as ever. "He is suing for custody of my son?" Jae-hwan asked, his voice dangerously soft. It was not a question seeking information. It was a question marveling at the sheer audacity of the cockroach. "Yes, sir," Mr. Park confirmed. "He cites emotional distress and the theft of a potential heir." Jae-hwan was silent for a long moment. He did not get angry. His rage was a cold, silent thing, a matter of logistics and execution. Anger was an emotion. What he felt was a need to correct a flaw in the system. Marcus Thorne was a bug in the code, and it was time to delete him. "By the law firm representing him," Jae-hwan said quietly. "Mr." Park did not blink. "The holding company that owns the majority stake is based in Brussels. It will take 12 hours. "You have 6, Jae-hwan replied, turning his attention back to the screen. The next day, Marcus received a call from his lead attorney. The man sounded bewildered, terrified. The firm was dropping him as a client. In fact, the entire firm had been acquired overnight by an anonymous shell corporation, and their new directives were clear. All pending litigation against Alara Jensen or Jae-hwan Kwon was to be withdrawn immediately with prejudice. This was the moment a rational man would have stopped. He would have understood that he was not in a fight. He was in a controlled demolition of which he was the target. But Marcus was not a rational man. His delusion only deepened. This was proof. Kwon was afraid of him, afraid of the public courts. He was hiding something. His escalation became more frantic, more personal. He hired a team of seedy private investigators, the kind of men who specialized in long lenses and whispered rumors. They were amateurs going up against a security apparatus that was state-of-the-art. Jae-hwan's team tracked the investigators from the moment they were hired, feeding them a carefully curated trail of false information that led them on a wild goose chase across 3 different cities. Meanwhile, in the quiet sanctuary of the penthouse, life was recalibrating. The main living area had been transformed. The cold, museum-like space was now warm and inviting. Soft rugs covered the marble floors. The furniture was arranged into cozy, functional groups, and along the southern glass wall, elegant automated solar shades now tracked the sun, bathing the room in a soft, diffused light. Alara had taken the sterile shell and given it a heartbeat. She and Jae-hwan had fallen into a quiet rhythm. They shared meals together, his mother often joining them, her presence a warm, stabilizing force. They did not talk about Marcus. They did not talk about the future. They talked about Min-jun's new tooth, about a new exhibition at the museum, about the structural integrity of a bridge they could see from the window. It was a slow, respectful development of a relationship based on recognition and safety, not on passion. He saw her competence, her quiet strength. She saw his deep, structural power, the way he moved the world without seeming to move at all. One evening, she found him watching her from the doorway of the living room. She was on the floor with Min-jun, building a tower of soft blocks. The baby gurgled and swiped at the tower, sending it tumbling down. Alara laughed, a sound that was still new and fragile in the vast apartment. A real smile reached her eyes. "He seems happy," Jae-hwan observed. His voice was steady as iron wrapped in silk. "He's safe," she replied, not looking up. "It's not the same thing, but it's a good start." "You are designing a new life for us," he said. It was an acknowledgement of her work, of her value. "I'm an architect," she said simply. "It's what I do." Far below, Marcus Thorne was making his final, fatal miscalculation. The investigators, fed their false trail, had reported that Alara and Kwon would be attending the annual Obsidian Gala, the premier philanthropic event of the year. It was hosted by Kwon International. For Marcus, this was the perfect stage. He envisioned a dramatic confrontation, a public reclaiming of his fiancée. He would expose Kwon as a brutish captor and Alara as a confused victim. He would be the hero of his own story one last time. He secured a ticket through a contact who owed him a favor, a man who had no idea he was selling a ticket to a ghost at his own funeral. He had his last good suit dry cleaned. He rehearsed his lines. He was preparing for a scene in a movie where he was the star. He had no idea he was walking willingly into the execution chamber. The Obsidian Gala was not a neutral location. It was the heart of Jae-hwan Kwon's power, a room filled with people who owed him their careers, their fortunes, their loyalty. By choosing to confront them there, Marcus was not crashing a party. He was springing a trap on himself. The grand ballroom of the Ethelred Hotel was a universe of crystal and starlight. Thousands of tiny lights glittered in the ceiling like a captured galaxy, their reflections fracturing in the facets of champagne flutes and diamond necklaces. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the low, confident murmur of the global elite. This was the Obsidian Gala, the apex of the city's social and financial calendar, and its host was Jae-hwan Kwon. Alara stood just off stage, a glass of water in her hand. She wore an emerald gown, the color of deep sea and old money. It was a column of silk that fell from a single architecturally precise shoulder strap, a dress that was both a shield and a statement. Her hair was swept up, revealing the elegant line of her neck. She was not the frightened, exhausted woman from the pharmacy. She was not the humiliated bride at the altar. She was serene, grounded, and incandescent. Beside her, Jae-hwan stood in a dark blue suit that was a masterpiece of quiet tailoring. He was, as always, a portrait of stillness and absolute authority. "Are you ready?" he asked, his low voice a private anchor in the public sea of noise. "I've been ready for a long time," she replied, meeting his gaze in the reflection of a nearby glass panel. They were scheduled to present the gala's main award for innovation in urban design. It was Jae-hwan's idea, a quiet, public recalibration of her identity. At that moment, Marcus Thorne entered the ballroom. He was a discordant note in a perfect symphony. His suit, once the height of fashion, now looked slightly too tight, a relic from a more prosperous era. His face was flushed, his eyes bright with a desperate manic energy. He scanned the room, his gaze sweeping past senators and CEOs, artists and academics searching for his target. He spotted her. His breath caught. He had expected to see her looking wan, defeated, a hostage. Instead, he saw a queen. The sight of her, radiant and calm at the center of this universe of power, shattered the last remnants of his delusion. This was not a rescue mission. This was a reckoning. But his arrogance was a terminal illness. He could not stop himself. He began to push his way through the crowd, his movements clumsy and aggressive. "Excuse me, pardon me," he muttered, shoving past a banking magnate who looked at him with cold disdain. On stage, the current speaker finished his remarks. A polite wave of applause rippled through the room. Jae-hwan placed a light hand on the small of Ilara's back. "It's time." They walked to the center of the stage. The spotlight found them, and a hush fell over the room. They were a striking pair, his dark, quiet power and her bright, elegant grace. "Good evening," Jae-hwan began, his voice calm and clear, filling the vast space without effort. "Tonight, we are here to celebrate innovation, the courage to build something new, something better." "Ilara!" The shout was raw, desperate. It tore through the refined atmosphere like a rock through a stained glass window. All heads turned. Marcus had reached the edge of the stage, his face contorted in a mask of rage and disbelief. Security personnel began to move towards him, but Jae-hwan raised a single calming hand. He did not look surprised. He looked expectant. "Ilara, what are you doing?" Marcus yelled, his voice cracking. "You have an obligation to me. This man is a criminal. He's holding you captive." A nervous murmur went through the crowd. Ilara did not flinch. She looked down at Marcus, not with fear or anger, but with a kind of clinical pity. He was a relic of a past she had already demolished and rebuilt. "You owe me!" he screamed, his desperation mounting as he felt the weight of 1,000 powerful eyes on him. "I made you. That life was ours. You are my wife." The word wife hung in the air, a final pathetic attempt to claim ownership. Jae-hwan stepped forward slightly, positioning himself between Ilara and the man unraveling below them. He took the microphone from its stand. He was not angry. He was not performing. He was a professor about to deliver a final, devastating lecture. "Mr. Thorne," he said, his voice a quiet counterpoint to Marcus's frantic shouting. "You seem to be operating under several critical misconceptions. Let's correct them." He gestured to the massive screen behind him, which had been displaying the gala's logo. The logo dissolved, replaced by a series of legal documents, financial statements, and acquisition notices. The font was small, but the names and numbers were brutally clear. "First," Jae-hwan said, his voice as steady as a surgeon's hand, "you speak of obligations. As of 9:14 a.m. 3 weeks ago, my holding company, through a subsidiary in Luxembourg, acquired the entirety of your outstanding corporate and personal debt from First National Bank. This means the only person you have an obligation to is me." A gasp went through the audience. Marcus's face went white. The document on the screen changed, showing the deed to his penthouse apartment. "Second, you speak of your life. As of 2:30 p.m., 2 weeks ago, the mortgage on your residence was also acquired. You are currently 3 months in arrears. You are not a homeowner. You are a tenant, my tenant, and your eviction is scheduled for tomorrow morning." Marcus began to tremble, his bravado crumbling into dust. He looked around wildly, searching for an ally, a friendly face, but saw only cold, curious stares. "And finally," Jay Juan continued, his voice dropping to an almost conversational tone, "you speak of your wife. You use that term for this woman." He turned and gestured to Alara, a gesture of profound respect. "But the name you might be looking for is Alara Jensen. She is the lead architect and a senior partner in Quan International's new Urban Development Division. She is, in fact, the brilliant mind behind the Helios Tower, a project for which you fraudulently took credit." The screen changed one last time, displaying the original Helios Tower schematic, with architect Alara Jensen clearly visible at the bottom. "You see, Mr. Thorne," Jay Juan concluded, his voice a blade of ice, "you do not have a wife, you do not have a company, you do not have a home. You have nothing. You are a rounding error in a ledger that I now own." The downfall was absolute. The intricate scaffolding of Marcus's life, built on lies and arrogance, collapsed in a single silent moment. The blood drained from his face. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. His knees gave way, and he dropped to the floor with a heavy final thud. He was not dragged away, screaming. He was simply gone. 2 security guards lifted him by the arms, his body limp, and carried him out of the ballroom like a sack of discarded clothes. He was sobbing, not with rage, but with the broken, hiccuping sobs of a child who has finally understood the consequences. The great doors of the ballroom swung shut behind him, and he was erased. A stunned, absolute silence filled the room. Every eye was on the stage, on the man who had just publicly executed an empire with a few quiet words, and on the woman who stood beside him, serene and untouched. Jay Juan turned away from the spot where Marcus had been. His entire demeanor shifted, the icy precision melting away, replaced by a quiet warmth. He turned back to the audience, back to Alara. He gently took the microphone from the stand and held it out to her. "I believe you have an announcement to make, Miss Jensen," he said, his voice for the first time holding a note of public pride. Alara stepped forward into the spotlight. Her vindication was not loud or triumphant. It was a quiet, profound settling. She looked out at the sea of powerful faces, and she did not see a jury. She saw an audience waiting to hear from the most capable person in the room. "Good evening," she began, her voice clear and strong, resonating with an authority she had always possessed but had never been allowed to use. "I would like to introduce the true architect of the Helios Tower. Me." She paused, letting the statement land, letting it rewrite the history they all thought they knew. "And tonight, I am honored to announce my next project as head of Quan International's Urban Development Division, the Polaris Initiative. A sustainable, multi-use community designed not just to house people, but to build a better, more connected way of life." She spoke for 10 minutes, her passion and intelligence on full display. She did not stumble. She did not hesitate. She laid out a vision that was bold, brilliant, and entirely her own. When she finished, there was a moment of stunned silence, and then the room erupted. It was not polite applause. It was a roar of approval, a standing ovation from the most powerful people in the world. They were not applauding Jay Juan's power. They were applauding her genius. Later, after the speeches and the handshakes, after the hushed congratulations and the looks of newfound respect, She found herself standing with Jae Hwan on a private balcony overlooking the city. The noise of the gala was a muted hum behind a wall of glass. Below them, the city was a tapestry of light, a million small stories unfolding in the dark. "They see you now," he said, standing beside her. He was not looking at the city. He was looking at her. "You saw me first," she replied softly. A slow exhale, a breath she felt she had been holding for years, escaped her lips. The weight of her past, the constant grinding effort of enduring, was finally lifted. It was replaced by a feeling she could barely name. A quiet, steady peace. A sense of being correctly placed in the universe. A real smile reached her eyes, one that was not fragile or new, but deep and knowing. He reached out and took her hand. His was warm, his grip firm but gentle. It was not a gesture of possession. It was a gesture of partnership. "My mother is already annoyed," he said, a hint of dry wit in his voice. "She says you are working too hard. She wants to know when you are designing the nursery for our daughter." Alara laughed, a full, genuine sound that floated out into the night air. "Our daughter? She is convinced the next one will be a girl," he said with a small shrug. "She is rarely wrong about these things, and she has already picked out a name." Alara looked at their joined hands, then up at his face. The man who had been a stranger in a bar, a phantom investor, a terrifying protector, was now just a man, a complicated, quiet, powerful man who saw her for exactly who she was. He had not rescued her. He had provided the structural support for her to rescue herself. "I don't leave because things become complicated," she said, echoing her own words from the car, turning them into a new kind of vow. "I know," he said, his thumb tracing a slow circle on the back of her hand. "It is why I stayed." They stood there for a long time in the quiet of the night, watching the city breathe below them. Their future was not a fairy tale ending. It was not a simple, happily ever after. It would be a life built from honesty and complication, from shared meals and late-night design sessions, from the quiet strength of his protection and the fierce brilliance of her vision. It was the daily choice to stay, to build, to create a family not from a contract, but from a foundation of mutual respect and an earned, unshakable safety. It was the promise of what comes next. Some people will take your silence for weakness and your grace for compliance. They will build their empires on your quiet competence, believing you are just another asset on their balance sheet. But strength is not always loud. Sometimes it is the silent, unyielding force of a woman who knows her own worth, waiting for the moment to reclaim it. And sometimes it is the quiet, observant power of a man who sees her, truly sees her, and decides to balance the books. Drop a green heart in the comments if you agree that Alara's emerald gown was the perfect symbol of her final victory. What do you think Marcus Thorne's first thought was when he woke up the next morning with nothing? Let us know in the comments below. If this story of justice and vindication moved you, please show your support by hitting that like button right now. Every like helps us bring more powerful stories like this to you. And if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Hit that button and ring the notification bell because you won't want to miss what happens when power, loyalty, and family collide. The story of the Kwon dynasty is just beginning.